Okay, so we're going to be talking about the introduction to agriculture, and we're going to talk about intensive and extensive farming. So intensive farming requires a large amount of labor and capital. They use small plots of land and high yields per acre. Some examples of intensive farming are plantation agriculture, which is whenever usually less developed countries are producing food for lower labor costs, and they're usually cash crops like cotton or like tobacco and all that. And next is mixed crops and livestock, and that's when you're growing crops and livestock at the same time, and the crops are being cultivated to feed the livestock, so then you can make profit off selling the livestock. Then market gardening is the next one, and that's usually close to the CBD, and it's intensive, and you're making fruits and vegetables mainly to sell to close to the market. Next is extensive, and it's usually low capital inputs, and they use large plots of land, and they have low yields per acre. This is like shifting cultivation. That's whenever, it's also called like known as slash and burn, whenever they are cutting down and burning it and then using it and then shifting and letting that soil get its nutrients back, so then they can go back and do the same thing. Next is nomadic herding, and that's whenever they are going around and letting their cattle or like sheep or horses graze in arid and semi-arid regions, and they don't require a lot of people, and it's very extensive over large land. And then ranching is next, whenever they have just like this one is like in a set area, and they're having horses and like cattle graze in their area. And agriculture is influenced by economic factors such as like cost of land, cost of labor, and cost of machinery. Next, we're going to do settlement patterns and survey methods. And so some settlement patterns in rural settlements are clustered settlements. That's usually whenever like the villages are like clustered and everyone's connected, so they have a sense of community and they're sharing resources within the community. And then next is dispersed settlements, and that's usually when they're spaced out and everyone's close to like their farms and their own resources, so they kind of lack community and they're not as they don't really communicate as much. And also linear settlements, and that's whenever they're along transportation roads, such as like roads or rivers, so then they can all have equal access to the roads and transportation. And the survey methods are meets and bounds, and that's whenever we're using land markers to determine where people live. Like if you have a barn over here and like this, and you're just going off of those landscape areas and landforms, you're going to determine where your land is. Next is long lots, and that's in relationship to the river. So like the settlements are built linearly towards the river, so then they can have equal transport. It kind of relates to the linear settlement. And next is township and range, and that's usually it's a grid system, and they have 6 by 6 1 mile by 1 mile areas of land, and it's a grid system. Okay, and next we're gonna do agricultural origins and diffusion. And so there are several agricultural herds, and different animals and plants are domesticated in different herds. So one of the first agricultural herds is the Fertile Crescent, and it cultivated like wheat and oats, and it like diffused into northern and eastern Africa and Europe and the Middle East. And then the next agricultural herd was Southeast Asia, and they grew mangoes and coconuts, and that diffused into the East Indies and India. And outside and East Asia is another agricultural herd, and they mainly cultivated rice and soybeans, and they diffused to Korea and Japan. The next agricultural hearth is Central America, and they cultivated maize, crops, squash, and peppers, and they diffused to North America and South America. And the last agricultural hearth is Sub-Saharan Africa, and they grew yams and coffee, and it diffused to Southern Africa. So agricultural diffused through like trade routes and the Columbia Exchange. So trade routes, the Silk Road and the Indian Ocean like helped diffuse animals and plants across like Central Asia and the Middle East. And the Columbia Exchange helped after the Spanish conquered Mesoamerica and South America, then it could diffuse animals and plants between the region. And then the other forms of diffusion are like cultural, like the type of cuisine that people bring whenever they migrate to an area, and increasing wealth because they had demand for new like beef, pork, and other stuff. The next one I am doing is the second agricultural revolution, and this one occurred in Great Britain because of the Industrial Revolution. So it caused agricultural advancements, and it had advancements of the steel plow, the McCormick reaper, and the seed drill. The steel plow helped clear more land, and the McCormick reaper harvested faster and gathered crops faster, and then the seed drill planted more at a time. And the impacts of the second agricultural revolution were they allowed for food production to grow and like exponentially, and so it debunked like the Malthusian theory where the population and the grows exponentially and the food grows linearly, so it debunked that. And then it also helps shifting from primary sector to secondary sector because not as many farmers were needed because now that you have so much machinery. And the next one was the caloric intake increase, which allowed for food security, which then allowed for longer life expectancy because the more food you have, the healthier you are. The next one is the Green Revolution, and that's when the diffused modern agricultural methods to developing countries. So this created higher yield in plants because the new methods were GMOs and hybrids and hybridization, and it helps resist to like pests and stuff, and it allowed for shorter growing periods. And then GMOs, genetically modified things that you could not have whenever you were just doing the hybrids. And they also diffused chemicals like pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers that help the plants because pesticides help the pest stay away, herbicides help target like invasive plants, and then fertilizers allow them to grow faster. And they also diffused machinery, and the machinery helped decrease labor. They also did irrigation, which allowed better use of their water, and they also did transportation, which allowed them to send their foods that they cultivated to markets. Then last one is the line tuning theory, and I have it up on here. And so it's showing that, it showed that the von Thun model, the urban center, is in the middle. And it's showing how as you get farther away, the cost of land decreases. So the closest one, which is in this first ring, is intensive farming and dairy. Dairy and intensive farming, such as like producing like truck farming and vegetables and fruit, are right there because they are perishable. So they need to get closer to the market faster, or else they won't be able to make a profit off their items. Next is forest, and this is because people back then, they needed fuel and they needed products to build their houses with. So they needed it there because transportation was high, so you had to be closer. And then the next one in the third ring was crops, And crops was there because they were not as heavy. They were pretty light actually. And so whenever they transported them there, they weren't perishable, so you could transport them great distances. And the last one is ranching because you need a large land to have your animals graze. And also you could, you might think that the transportation would cost more because they're heavy, but Malthusian said that they could just walk to the market and then sell them there. And some negative effects, or like how this is not relevant anymore, is actually because he assumed that the land was flat, and not all the land is flat, so you may have different obstacles that get in your way when getting to the market. And also he thought there was a single market, but there's different markets globally and regionally that you can sell your items to, and locally, like in town, there's different markets. And also there's advancements in technology, so there's now refrigeration, so whenever you could have the intensive farming farther out because you now have refrigeration to store it, and then you can send it into the market. And that's it for this.